Well, hello there, everyone, and welcome to another WEI podcast. Today, we're talking about strategies out there to help companies like yours continue to transform and modernize your IT infrastructure, really to unlock the full potential of all the data that your employees, your customers are creating. I want to share a stat here. I believe that we all know the fact that unlocking really the potential of our critical business data is key these days. Here's something from Forrester. They found that insights-driven enterprises 8 times more likely to see at least a 20% growth rate, right? So that's the reason we want to be modernizing. Here's the deal. Every time we go on a journey like this, there can be some challenges. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about here today. I am your host, James Hilliard. Glad to be here with the WEI team. We have invited a couple experts online to join us here today. Matt Leal is with us. He is a pre-sales solutions architect at WEI. Glad to have him on board. Shawn Murphy is also here, cybersecurity solutions architect at WEI. You better bet we're going to talk some security here because protecting that data, very important. And we have our special featured speaker. It is former White House Chief Information Officer, also technology thought leader and cybersecurity expert, Theresa Payton on board. Currently, she's the CEO at Forrester Solutions. Really glad to have all three here to share their insights into how companies are moving through this modernization journey. And that's probably not the last time I'm going to say that word journey, because that's what it is. There is no end point. It is a journey and will continue to evolve. We'll talk about some of the challenges the team here is seeing out there for companies like yours. Also, definitely want to talk. I mentioned the security aspect of data. We also have to store that data. And so I know we're going to have an opportunity to share some insights here into how solutions such as the HPE Alletra Storage, which is built on HPE ProLiant Gen11 servers and powered by 4th Generation Intel Xeon scalable processors, can be part of the solution set for you in terms of storage. So with that, we've got about 26 or so minutes left in our conversation. So I'm glad to have, again, Matt, Shawn, and Theresa here. Matt, I want to start with you. And the kickoff here is, and look, I'm going to ode to the White House. Let's do a State of the Union from you, Matt, and your perspective of the WEI ecosystem and the customers out there. How do you see those teams faring on their journey to become this insight-driven enterprise out there? How are they doing in general across the board?
Sure. Thanks, James. So Matt Leal here, pre-sales solution architect here at WEI. And if you're not familiar with WEI, we are a value-added reseller, and we're based up here in Southern New Hampshire, here in Salem. We're a privately owned VAR, consists of about 200 employees, and I want to emphasize that about 40% of those folks that make up WEI are part of our engineering and pre-sales practice, Shawn and myself included. So our customers span a number of different industries, whether that's finance, healthcare, manufacturing. Many of them have a global presence, and we do see a good variety of unique challenges that customers face in those different industries. So as part of working with WEI, what we do is we make a concerted effort to provide value around understanding your unique environment, the challenges that are unique to you, and ultimately how to overcome those challenges. So we take time, learning lessons from working with other clients within your industry that, oftentimes you find that organizations within the same industry have the same sorts of issues. So we absolutely leverage what we've learned in the past from working with other clients, and we bring that shared learning to you.
And Matt, let me ask you and dive a little bit deeper here. The industries that you work with, you mentioned there is so much data created in all those, right? Manufacturing, healthcare, all sorts of, again, across the board. This idea of modernization is not brand new to today. We've been talking about modernizing our companies for the last 4 or 5 years, and there were some unique challenges during the COVID time, but the journey had already begun before that. So again, in general, do you find that most teams have, at least in some way, started this journey? That you don't come across teams anymore that are like, yeah, no, we really haven't done anything. We're still super old school.
It really depends, and sometimes it varies by industry. There are certainly certain industries that are more cutting edge, and others that are sort of hampered by um, different either requirements, that are unique to that industry. Take healthcare, for example. There are a lot of requirements around data privacy that prevent, say, an organization from migrating to the cloud because they need, to maintain data sovereignty. So that's sort of just one example of how a specific industry might, in organizations that work in that field, maybe a little bit behind the curve. But that isn't to say that, with working with a VAR like WEI, we're not able to, bring you up to speed, and get you back in front of, the data modernization journey that you're on.
Well, Shawn, let's mix you in here and go a little bit deeper on some of the specific challenges out there. Obviously, I'd mentioned data out there. It is something. It's the lifeblood now of all organizations, small to the largest out there. What are some of the challenges? Is it just the sheer volume of the data coming? So they're trying to figure out how do we store it all? Is it on the security front? I know that's where you have some expertise and focus, but what are some of the biggest challenges again across the board that you're seeing, Shawn?
Yeah, so I see three main cybersecurity challenges across the board, across all verticals, all sizes of customers. The first is sort of dovetailing into what you and Matt were just talking about, which is this explosion in the attack surface. The attack surface is sort of a technical term that we use to describe the infrastructure's border with the public internet. So if you think a decade or two ago, typical organizations had maybe a couple of data centers and a couple of offices, and they had very high walls and deep moats around those resources. So it was pretty easy to protect them. But because of this data modernization journey, as you call it, I like that concept of this is something that's ongoing and everyone's at different stages. That attack surface has exploded. It's gotten quite a bit larger, but it's also very dynamic. It's ever changing because of things like remote work and cloud, hybrid cloud, SaaS services. All of these things make it very difficult to pin down exactly what you're trying to protect on a day-to-day basis. And that sort of goes into number two, which you were just commenting on, James, which is the proliferation of data, both the quantity of data, because now that you have all this attack surface that you're trying to defend, the amount of data that you're collecting from those resources is increasing dramatically. And also the quality of that data is going up dramatically as well, because we have lots of really detailed telemetry. A lot of these services provide APIs where you can get all sorts of metrics on the users and the application and data and how everything is performing. And you might think that this makes the security team's job much easier, but it actually counterintuitively has the opposite effect because they're just getting inundated with data. That data modernization journey leads to data challenges for typical security teams. And that leads sort of into the third challenge I wanted to touch on, which is the inability to stop breaches. So we all hear about breaches constantly in the news. That's probably a very small subset of the breaches that are actually occurring. The FBI has reported that last year, cybercrime alone in the US has probably accounted for $12.5 billion worth of losses. And that's just the crime that the FBI knows about. Again, there's probably quite a lot that's not reported for whatever reason. And also that only touches on quantifiable losses. So if you think about things like brand reputation or the impact of privacy, or I know Theresa has thoughts on manipulation of societies. Those are all inabilities that a lot of our customers are struggling with. And so those are some of the challenges that our customers face. I think we'll get into details about how WEI can address them. I don't want to sound too doom and gloom, but that's what we're seeing out there.
Oh, I know. I appreciate that. And it is a good setup to say and acknowledge where the challenges are, but that we can address those before we get, and that'll be more kind of the second half of our conversation. But before we get there, Theresa, I want to get you involved here. One, thank you for your public service. Again, as White House CIO, it's great to have you here and your perspectives. And Matt and Shawn laying out some of the customer challenges out there. I'll recap, right? The attack surface it's grown. The quantity of all the data we're collecting, that just means there's more to go after and attack. And breaches, right? It's more likely the companies have been breached and they just don't know about it yet, as opposed to when they will be breached or if they will be breached. It's like it's likely happened, but they don't know it yet. So those are three big challenges. You agree with all those challenges, Theresa, and you add to that list, or you say, yeah, those are some of the three biggest ones that really need to be tackled?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for having me here. And I think, Matt and Shawn, spot on with your comments, and you as well, James. And yeah, this does align with sort of the broader industry trends. And I love this topic. And before I get into, kind of the cybersecurity risks, I just want to remind everybody there's some incredible use cases out there for data modernization. So we know that data modernization is already assisting the financial services industry with detecting check fraud much faster than in the past. It's being used to actually speed up repairs for utility companies. We've seen where data modernization allows retailers to really tap into this data that they have to accelerate their decision making, and even travel and hospitality. They've been using data modernization to really understand what should we be focused on in order to enhance customer delight. And so I think there's some really incredible use cases for data modernization, but at the same time, it is creating a new set of potential problems. And I always say to people, the way I like to think about technology is, technology is developed to provide sort of a vehicle to enable human user stories. And if I can use the analogy just for a moment of a car, which we were talking about cars earlier, James, right? And so if I can use the analogy just for a moment, car technology is an incredible way to move from point A to point B, and it can be used both commercially, it can be used by consumers. And sometimes criminals will use cars to get away with crimes and to get away from the crime scene. That's how we should be thinking about big tech and technology, right? So with these incredible innovative technologies that will get us from point A to point B and get us to where we need to go strategically. And sometimes cyber criminals take those technologies and they use them for nefarious purposes. But it doesn't mean we should shy away from implementing these technologies. And so I have great hope and optimism that with the right thinking, the right design strategies, not only can you take your businesses to the next level, but you're actually going to be able to protect them and kind of create these creative designs and innovative designs that actually can outthink and outmaneuver the cyber criminals.
Do you find, Theresa, anyone out there is still saying, no, I don't want to modernize because it'll bring too much extra problems for me. I'm just going to try and hide here in the corner and do what I'm doing and hope the bad guys don't see me?
There is a little bit of sort of the hope is a strategy, and by being obscure, maybe I'm more secure. So there is something to be said, and some businesses do I think wish for those simpler times and simpler days, but I would say the majority of executives that I interact with and businesses that I work with, the CISOs and the CIOs, there's that acknowledgement of we have to modernize and tap into the data we have. We need to do a better job when we're creating and storing data, thinking about future usage points, protection points. And so I believe that most executives want to embark or continue to embark on their existing data modernization strategies. Now, having said that, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's been incredible investment made in cybersecurity products and solutions, in that checklist of frameworks and being compliant. And yet bad things are still happening. And so I think there is a level of fatigue and frustration of, even with best faith efforts, we're still getting hacked. So what do we do next? And I think, I think the combination of Matt and Shawn and their experiences and James, you sort of guiding this conversation, hopefully people will leave here with one or two things that they think, hey, I can actually tackle the next level of modernization while at the same time try some different things, and we will be more secure in the process.
Let's try and give some in the audience one of those items right now from you. I don't believe that there's anyone in IT that doesn't want to modernize. I believe the whole of the IT industry wants to. I do believe that there are some C-class that they're just worried. They come from a different mindset, that business mindset. They just don't quite see it. So is there something, Theresa, you can say to our IT professionals out there that are dealing with that executive suite that's just a little too hesitant? What can they say in the next week or two to try and get them on board to move forward now in a modernization journey and get that first step taken? Because sometimes that's the hardest step.
Yeah, sometimes it is the hardest step. So I always say the best place to start are the human user stories, because the executives think in terms of, there's the business profit and loss statement. If it's an executive in government organizations, they're thinking about initiatives and funding of initiatives and outcomes. And so I always say, start with the human user stories. What is the mission and vision of our operations? Who do we serve? How do we serve them? Like, don't even talk about the technology. Who do we serve? Why do we exist? And how do we serve them? And once you really understand those human user stories, then you can start to layer in, well, what role does technology play in these human user stories? And the humans in the stories are who you're serving. In the how you serve them, those are your employees, your contractors, and your third-party vendors. And then, what do we want that experience to feel like? And so then once you understand how the technology overlays on top of that human user story, then you could start to have conversations around privacy, security. And I always say that the best way to get executives on board, once you talk to them about that human user story, is to talk in terms of secured digital transformation. When you start to focus on saying cybersecurity and you only use that as part of your conversation, you sound like an extra. You sound like, I've got a long list of things I need to do, and you're there on the list. I know you're important, but you're an extra. No, you're actually part of the business. You're an enabler of that human user story. And if you can back up and start there and show how your secured digital transformation supports those human user stories, you're going to have a winner. I mean, I was very blessed. I had senior executives at the White House who they lived and breathed national security and international security. And so what I had to do was really understand the human user stories of the mission and operations of the executive office of the president, and then show them how secure digital transformation was going to enable those stories. I couldn't just show up and say, guess what? We're going to 25 character passwords and you're going to love it because you love national security. Like, that's not a winner. That's a big, huge loser. And so I didn't typically start my conversations about cybersecurity saying the words cybersecurity. I started off with, let me talk to you about this initiative, why it's going to make a difference for this particular White House initiative or this particular group of staff. And then security, of course, was baked in, but I didn't have to use the words typically around cybersecurity. Hopefully that's helpful to people.
I hope it is, and I think it will be. And Shawn, I'm smiling here as I come back to you, because I'm going to ask Shawn, you probably then don't go out there and start with, hey, you need to buy some HP Alletra storage. You start talking to the customers about solutions, about trying to find out what do they want to do for their customers. What is their mission? Is that where your conversation at WEI starts?
Absolutely. I love that concept of the human user story. I think that's a great tool to use because we're speaking to the business. We're trying to help them harness risk in cybersecurity. I think that's another way of sort of enabling the business to use risk effectively. So when WEI gets engaged in security projects, we want to see the whole landscape. We want to understand the data center. We want to understand the cloud. We want to understand initiatives. We want to understand the context of the business itself and what it's trying to achieve. And then that helps us put together a holistic cybersecurity solution rather than just a product or feature, a true solution to drive outcomes. So that's definitely part of our approach to our customers is to think in that more holistic manner. And I love that. I'm definitely going to steal that, Theresa. Thank you for that tool.
And if Shawn's going to steal it, I think other people in the audience are going to be resonating. That's going to be resonating with them. Matt, let me jump in here. Take me through a little bit of the technical talk when that does come up, because again, I'm jumping us forward here a little bit, but Shawn sharing the WEI approach, right? Learn the business. What are the outcomes that are expected, and all that, and really build that story and that relationship. And then you do get into the technical talks when you're talking about some of those solutions. Do you start with one or two people on the team and then expand it? Do you get the whole team on board from your customers at the early stages, so you're getting these different perspectives of the technologies that they do have and the technologies they're exploring? Kind of talk to us about what that looks like for a customer.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the times when we're engaging with a client of ours, we try to bring the right specialists to the table when they need to be there, right? And likewise from the client side, we do a lot upfront to understand who are the right personas within that customer that need to come to the table, and what specialists are relevant, and have the expertise on our side, and essentially bring them together. And that's almost always going to have come out to be a fruitful engagement. We were talking about stealing a second ago, and I thought I might steal sort of a something that Theresa said around using vehicles as an analogy. I was just thinking that if you look back a couple of years or maybe a decade or so at the vehicles that we had on the road at the time, um, the methods of that people would use in trying to break into and steal those vehicles are different than the methods that criminals are using today, right? So those methods are constantly evolving. And what we're doing at WI is, we're trying to stay one step ahead of the methods that, are out in the wild that, criminals are using. And that's just another way that, we're helping to bring sort of that expertise and, sharing what we're finding out in the field with other clients.
Shawn, I want to come back to you again with your cybersecurity focus. What are some of the leading customers out there, WEI customers? What are they doing on a security front now, whether it's a mindset, whether it is certain grouping types of technology, but where is their thought process? The ones that really seem to be doing well and dare I say, staying ahead of the cyber criminals out there, or maybe at least keeping pace. What do you see that they're doing well? What are they focusing on as, again, an area for listeners to say, we're not really focused there. Maybe that's something for us to look at. What do you see out there?
Yeah, definitely. I spend a lot of time in security operations centers. That's where I cut my teeth in cyber, and that's where I live. And in the SOC, they're typically behaving like firefighters, running from one burning incident to the next, trying to figure out what happened, remediate, and move on to the next one. And one of the things that I've been focusing on with our customers and some of the outcomes that we've been trying to drive is focusing efforts on becoming more proactive and not reactive. And one of the ways that I think you can get there is by developing useful metrics. And before we even get engaged in a project with customers, the first thing we would do is figure out what metrics we want to drive, measure the current state, and then show how whatever we're doing is improving those metrics and reducing risk to the business, or giving the business better visibility into their risks. The two metrics that I've been very keen on lately, and this is ever changing, to Matt's point, the tactics are changing, so our metrics have to change periodically to adapt to those, the changing threat landscape. But the two that I've been focused on lately are mean time to detect a threat and mean time to remediate or respond to a threat. And essentially, our goal is to shrink those numbers as much as possible so that we can detect threats faster and get them off of the network faster. And I love the car analogy. I'm from Detroit, so all of my analogies go back to cars eventually. The way I think about it is very similar to that of a self-driving car, because today cars are mostly manual. You get behind the wheel, and if you're tired, or if you're distracted, or if you're intoxicated, God forbid, then your ability to drive the car is going to be impacted. I think the SOC needs to go through a similar transition to what the automotive industry is going through right now, moving towards autonomous vehicles. And in my mind, the autonomous SOC depends heavily on analytics and automation to address those two metrics. On the analytics side, machines are much better at reading huge quantities of data and detecting anomalies or deviations from the norm in those data sets. And on the automation side, you have lots of different tools in your environment, and an individual logging into each of those to make changes to remediate a threat might be slow and also monotonous and tedious for those SOC professionals. So I think if you put the analytics and automation together in an intelligent way, you can get something close to an autonomous SOC that drives those metrics down and can show how it's actually delivering value back to the business.
Theresa, I'd love your comments on that, on the autonomous SOC. Is it something we're going to see sooner rather than later? And just your overall view of where our focus is now as companies on security, and something maybe in a blind spot that we're not seeing. Maybe start with the SOC aspect, and then we can broaden it out.
Yeah, I love hearing, kind of going from what Matt was talking about over to Shawn with the autonomous SOC. And I love hearing that, because there could potentially be a great way to, automate some of the lower level points, and also use kind of the training of, well, what's happening next, to train sort of the autonomy of the SOC, and people who are just choosing that as a career choice, right? So I'm always thinking about, if we want talented people to be in technology, and especially in cybersecurity, how do they get trained, and how can we tap into what they're learning and train tools and technologies and processes? So I think there's a really incredible opportunity there to pull more people into the field and sort of leverage technology and have more autonomy there. And that would be, I think, a huge game changer. And I love the analogy of, as cars have changed and gotten safer and have more capabilities, and more assistance to the people in that vehicle, the idea that SOCs could do the same thing too. I think that would be absolutely incredible. Also, one of the things that I think about too, there's a stunning data statistic about, kind of all of the transactions that we're all doing as consumers, and business to business and business to consumer. And I want to kind of share those data statistics, because I think it's really important, if you're going to talk about a data modernization strategy, just really understanding what we're talking about here. So there's a couple of different research reports that are predicting, if you look at just mobile web traffic and the data that it creates, 84 exabytes of data by the end of 2024, and global internet traffic growing up to 348 exabytes of data. Now, it's hard to wrap your head around talking to, especially, it's hard for me to wrap my head around it as a technologist, but then if you're talking to business executives about your own data modernization strategies, the consumption of data, what you need to process to make better decisions, you might be talking towards the exabyte level. So I love a visual. So I looked at the math on this. And so the estimates are, if you take 1 exabyte, right, which is 1 billion gigabytes, and you stacked up today's smartphones to get a visual of what that storage looks like, it's 1.56 million smartphones stacked up back to back. That's what that storage of exabytes looks like. And that's a single exabyte. And I just said 84 exabytes by the end of this year for mobile traffic alone, and 340. Like, it just starts to get, it like sounds like a Monopoly game. So to all that to say, the more that we can leverage technology to assist the human user story and these innovative and creative ideas, the more we're going to be able to sort of create a wingspan for each of us as individuals in an organization, trying to make sure that the mission is executed upon, right? So I love that idea of autonomy, and I'm looking forward to seeing how different solutions providers play into making the SOC more autonomous. And then for the places where you do apply staffing models, letting them focus on sort of those gnarly, very niche problem sets that the technology is not ready to think through.
I'm going to have to throw in my car analogy here, Theresa. The question's to you. Is there anything in our blind spot? Maybe we're using our mirrors, but it's in the blind spot on our security focus these days that we really need to throw that head over the shoulder to see that there's something on the security. Maybe it's coming up on us. Maybe it's already been there and just tracking us in that blind spot that we should spend a little more time and focus on as organizations on our security awareness.
Yeah, when I think about these journeys and not to knock compliance frameworks, because I think they create like a very nice rally point for everybody about kind of these are the bare minimum standards we should all strive for. It's like flossing and brushing daily, right? It's like a good way to keep your teeth. But, things can still happen. You can get kicked in the teeth. You can have other issues, right? But flossing and brushing daily, I think we all agree is really important. And I see compliance checklists as being very much sort of that basic building blocks. But I think the blind spot that comes about when we only focus on compliance and regulatory checklists is we have a duty of care to the organization, to the customers, to the data that's being created, who it's being created about, these patterns of life, these behaviors. We have a duty of care. And that's a blind spot that doesn't always really get articulated in a regulatory and compliance framework as we talk about security. And some people will say, well, that's privacy's job. That's what the chief privacy officer. It's actually not privacy and it's not cybersecurity. It's literally just because we can create, correlate, and decision on the data, does it mean that we should? And what is our duty of care as we're doing this? And from a cybersecurity perspective, if you create it, if you collate it, if you store it, if you have it, somebody wants it and they have nefarious purposes and intents when they take that data. And so we have to constantly be asking ourselves in that blind spot, that thing we're not seeing in the mirror and our sensors aren't picking up either. If you create it and it exists, assume compromise, assume somebody will steal it, assume somebody will tamper with it, assume somebody will want to poison the decision engines you run against that data. And if you have that mindset, it'll change your design. Again, human user story. If you assume all the things that you are doing are going to be compromised, not a win, not an if, we're going to have a best faith effort, assume it will be. Assume technology will fail you. You will have theft. You will have compromise. You will have poisoned data. You will have poisoned algorithms. What will you do differently? What will your checks and balances be? What will your governance be? Will you even create and store that data at all? Or will you move to like a data tokenization strategy? You ask me for something, I decide in that moment, it's like a game of Go Fish. Sure, in that moment, I'm authorized to give you the 8 of hearts and then try again. So we have to be thinking differently. That's really what's in our blind spot right now.
I appreciate that. And Matt, I'm going to come back to you to kind of wrap things up a little bit. And then folks, I'll give you some contact information for the WEI team. But again, it goes back to the fact, Matt, that I know you guys aren't leading out there with solutions, whether they're HPE storage solutions or security offerings. That's not what you guys lead with. You really are in the line with the recommendations from Theresa here, is learning that story of the customers and probably helping the customers sometimes learn their own story, because sometimes we get so busy in our day-to-day that we don't see that. So it sounds like you guys really there, Matt, help lift their head out of the sand. They're not hiding, they're just buried in work. But let them see who they are, what they are, really kind of reflect. And then that allows them to become this more modern company. I've put some words out there. I want you to yes or no me on that front, Matt, and then give one last little bit to the few folks that may be in the audience that are not really far along on their journey, and how you over WEI can help them move a little bit further down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're totally right. Sometimes customers do just need to come up for a breath of air to realize, the state that, their environment might be in, whether that's from a security perspective or in terms of their overall modernization journey. I'll use the car analogy one more time. And that's, if you look at older vehicles, they're obviously more prone to attacks because they're easy to, jimmy the lock on a door. Whereas today we have all sorts of different technology that helps protect our vehicles, and the same goes for IT. So a lot of times customers don't want to touch their environment. Things work, the business is running normally. But at the end of the day, they're realizing that, as the years go on, they're becoming more and more susceptible to security vulnerabilities. And so at WEI, what we try to do is show them the many options that are out there, right? Whether it's, a security tool from vendor A or from vendor B, or if it's a secure platform from, say, HPE. It's really all about sort of opening eyes, showing our customers the modern way to run their IT. And the modern way is often the more secure way.
30 minutes is rarely enough time to scratch the surface, but I think we did at least do that. We scratched the surface. We gave some good tips, I think, that are going to resonate with folks out there. We hope that it did with you all. And really, we want to encourage you to continue the conversation. We said modernization is a journey. This is also a journey of conversations, right? To really discover what your story is and what you want it to be, and then layer on the storage, layer on the security, layer on the processes and the technologies and all. But at the end of the day, one of the big takeaways here is that you got to focus on the people all the time, always. That's really the starting point. I think we've heard that from everyone here today. So Matt, Shawn, and Theresa, I want to thank you all for being here for the conversation. Folks, I said I'd give you some contact information, so here it is. One, if you're already engaged with the team at WEI, then stay in touch with that account team. They'll be glad to continue the conversation. WEI.com for more information. Email, you can go directly marketing@WEI.com. You can reference this event and then get some more information, set up some conversations as needed. And if you're someone like me that still loves the good old telephone and talking to people, 800-296-7837 to reach out to the team. With that, we'll wrap things up. Once again, James Hilliard here for WEI. Appreciate you joining us, and we do look forward to talking to you all down the road.